then let us join our guest, Nadya Seal Faith.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for having me. This is fun. I can honestly say I've never given to talk to an amateur radio club, and so it's really interesting to hear you guys. And I'm just really excited that you're excited to hear about how we kind of integrate radio work in our wildlife work. So thank you guys so much again for having me. I'll just go ahead and start. Just go ahead and share my screen. All right, hopefully you guys can see that okay?
Yep.
Awesome. All right, so yes, I'm just kind of letting you guys know I am me. My name is Nadya Seal Faith. I'm the Conservation and Science Associate for the Santa Barbara Zoo. Essentially what my job is I manage all of the field programs that the Santa Barbara Zoo is involved with, including the California Condor Recovery Program and the Island Fox Program. There are many other wonderful programs that we're involved with, but when it comes to radio telemetry, these two kind of take the cake. And so these are kind of the two programs that I'll be talking about, and also, talking about, well, what you guys are interested in, which is radios. So I will have time for some questions at the end. Apologies, my voice, I'm getting over what apparently everybody has right now. So you might be thinking to yourself, that's cool. You work for the zoo. I like animals, which is great because then I'm talking to the right audience. But what in the heck do radios and wildlife have in common? To answer that, I kind of want to go over the history of wildlife tracking, because that'll really give you a sense of, excuse me, how VHF and radio telemetry really fit into wildlife work. So, it really started in the 1800s with bird banding. A little guy called Audubon, James Audubon, decided that he wanted to know not only what birds were doing, but what individual birds were doing. And so he actually tied bands around black phoebes. And he tied them around in a way that he could identify the individuals and then watch them come back to the same nest sites every year. And so what that really did was it said, not only are these birds coming back to the same nest, but these individuals are coming back to the same nest. And so when it comes to, monitoring animal behavior, monitoring populations, being able to identify individuals is key. And that's going to be kind of the theme as I talk about the wildlife tracking. So moving on to the 1930s, because bird banding doesn't work for all species, they started to do scale clipping. So when it came to reptiles and amphibians, you can't always band. It doesn't really work too well to put certain tags on certain animals, just the way physiology works. So they would actually clip scales, and they would look at scar patterns, and they would create unique scar patterns so that they could, again, track populations, monitor behavior. Jump forward a decade, and interestingly enough, so folks were kind of monitoring radar, and they were doing this not only with weather radar, but also other types of radar. And they're noticing that birds came across as certain blips, and they realized that they could actually monitor these weather stations and monitor these other radar stations and track migratory bird patterns. And so that was kind of the first understanding, the first inkling that you can utilize these technologies to be able to do wildlife work. In that same decade, isotope analysis came about. And so what they discovered was that parts of animals, like bird feathers, will pick up certain isotopes from the environment. And when you can actually measure isotopes, so basically, the isotope is that chemical signature that's unique, to certain areas, to certain things, but that animals can actually absorb, elements from the environment. And so, when you can look at, something as easy as a bird feather, you can understand not only environmental influence, but also, history. And this has actually been really important in the California condor program, because with California condors, the biggest threat to their successful recovery is the ingestion of spent lead ammunition that's been left on the landscape. Unfortunately, it gets left into carcasses. It gets when the lead ammunition actually hits the carcass, it splays and gets in these many tiny little fragments. And unfortunately, when a condor ingests it, they can get lead toxicosis. But understanding that unique isotopic signature through feather analysis, we actually were able to see that condors are actually much more resilient to lead than we had originally thought. We were seeing these patterns. We were able to track through feather growth this pattern of lead exposure and then lead recovery. So the isotope analysis was just huge in understanding how the environment influences wildlife. Jump forward a decade. Now the marine folk want to get involved. Like, hey, you know what? There's ways that we can incorporate this kind of wildlife tracking in the marine world. And so they actually turned to acoustic telemetry. Radio waves don't quite work the way that they need to underwater. And so sound waves ended up being a really good way to be able to track individuals. And so you could place these kind of sound telemetry units, implant them in, fish and larger animals, and then be able to use sound telemetry to be able to track individuals. Now, the decade we're interested in, the 1960s, this is when VHF telemetry came through, very high frequency telemetry. Now, there was a lot of people that were actually kind of working on this simultaneously, and just this idea of really packaging, these radio frequencies into small packets that are, able to be worn by wildlife and have these unique frequencies that are able to be tracked. But it was really William, or AKA Bill Cochran, that was the engineer that really got, a lot of credit for being able to, package radio telemetry in a way that was useful for wildlife. He actually was an engineer, I believe it was the University of Indiana, and he actually, they say, moonlighted with some wildlife biologists, but he was able to collaborate with wildlife biologists to create the first tracking collars and the first devices that are able to be used on wildlife. Jump forward another decade, and photo identification became a really telling way to tell animals apart. It really started with the humpback whale and being able to tell that whale fin apart. There's unique identifiers with the whale fins. And then, interestingly enough, the following decade, the Condor program actually used photo identification prior to wing tags to be able to tell individuals apart. Jumping into the 1980s, pit tags. If you guys have a dog or a cat and you've taken them to the vet and they've recommended that they get microchipped, that is a pit tag. It's essentially just this tiny little, grain of rice RFID that allows you to identify the individual. Now, the drawback to this is that you have to have the animal in hand in order to be able to scan it. But on the bright side, you don't have to worry about battery. Pit tags never die because they are RFID. Well, I shouldn't say never. There's always the exception, but you don't, change batteries on a pit tag. You can put pit tags in, fairly small animals. So we work with red-legged frogs, and we actually put pit tags into red-legged frogs. And so you can actually put them, because they're so small, you can put them in a larger number of animals fairly safely. Jumping forward into the 1990s, getting more on the tech side, we have geolocator, GPS, and GSM technology. So now we're getting involved with satellites. We're actually getting into global positioning. The global positioning system actually talks to the satellites. GSM actually goes with this cellular network. And so it basically talks to the satellites to get, the GPS location, but it's able to transmit that information via the cellular network. So pretty interesting stuff. We actually use a combination of both VHS and GPS on the condors as well as the foxes. And then in the 2000s, we're getting crazy with nanotechnology. Basically, we just want to make everything as small as possible. And really with that, it, kind of applies to everything. And even VHF, they've actually started putting VHF on insects. So we also work with the Western monarch population, and they've actually started putting, if you can believe it, VHF units on monarchs. They are tiny, they're smaller than a penny, and they actually utilize Bluetooth technology to help pick them up. And so it's, the technology has really, gone crazy, and it's kind of amazing to see, what is here nowadays. But it's also very important to note that one of the, some of the things that we still use are some of the old school technology. And I say old school and I say 1800s, that's what I'm talking about, old school, because even with our plovers, we work with the Western snowy plover population as well. We band them all, and we rely on the banding and the unique banding combinations to track the individuals that we release. So really, now that I've talked about all of this wildlife tracking technology, what are we here for? We're here for radios. We're here for this radio frequency technology. So, diving in a little bit more about why we utilize VHF technology, the primary thing that we use it for is population monitoring. And so, when you have a listed species, and, I'm talking about this in the framework of listed species, but I do also want to mention that non-listed species are utilize VHF tracking as well, for a lot of similar reasons. But really that understanding of not only what the population is doing, but, the population composition. So, if you're a hunter, and you've ever, applied for a deer tag, California Department of Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as different other state agencies and national agencies, are monitoring these deer populations so they know how many tags to issue. And one of the ways that they can monitor that population is through VHF. So, we use VHF on listed species. And when I say listed, I mean Endangered Species Act listed. So ESA listed species. We're talking animals that are classified as endangered, animals that are classified as threatened. We need to monitor those populations because we need to know, how many individuals are on the landscape and how many of those individuals are adults, how many are juveniles, how many are males, how many are females. And all those metrics are really important because they integrate directly into management decisions. So very first thing is population monitoring. In this picture, you can see we actually attach VHF transmitters. They basically look like a AA battery with an antenna attached. We had those especially designed through Telonics, but we attach it to the tail feather of the condor. And really, the idea behind VHF units is that they're less than 5% of the body weight of the individual that you're putting them on, because you don't want to cause any disruption to behavior, especially in a flighted individual. We want to make sure that we're not, imbalancing them. We want to make sure that, this is not going to be a detriment to their life. So we put it to their tail feather. They molt their tail feather about every other year. So the battery unit basically has 18 to 24 months on it. And so when they molt, it's about time for them to get a new one anyway. So it kind of works in that respect. So that's putting on a condor. When we put them on foxes, we actually integrate them into collars. And so you can kind of see here, island foxes are actually smaller than house cats. They're about 4 to 5 pounds. They're really tiny things. Ironically, they're actually the apex predator of the island. So don't tell them that they're small because they won't believe you. But they're collars, and they have that antenna, as you can imagine, because they need to actually transmit the radio frequency. So that's probably the main reason why we have and utilize VHF technology. Secondarily to that is going to be behavioral monitoring. So not only do we want to know how many individuals are on landscape, what composition they are, but we also want to know what they're doing. We want to know their movement. We want to know their range. Are they going into certain places? Are they favoring certain places? When we're trying to locate condor nests, we utilize VHF technology. So behavioral monitoring is really important. And then finally, not as exciting, but equally as important is mortality monitoring. When you have a listed species, when you have a species that's threatened or in danger and their numbers are low, it's critical to understand why they're dying. So right now, we know that lead is the #1 mortality or cause of mortality for California condors. But in order to ensure that we know that that is consistently the highest cause of mortality, we need to be able to quickly recover any deceased condors in order to send them in for necropsy and understand what their cause of mortality is. If we get to them too late, then the necropsy results aren't as effective. And if we don't know what condors are dying of, then we can't make confident management decisions that can lead hopefully to their potential recovery. If something else were to pop up, like avian influenza did in Arizona, and we weren't able to confirm that that was the case, then we wouldn't be able to make those critical management decisions. If we were still kind of looking at lead, but really avian influenza is taking down the flock, that really changes the dynamic of how we can recover these species effectively. So while it may not be, the most fun job, it is very important, and VHF are really key to that. And one of the reasons that we know that mortality monitoring occurs is that the VHF actually changes the regularity of its beats that it emits. So in an active individual, the beats emit at about 60 times a minute. And when an animal or the device is inactive for 18 to 24 hours, then the beat almost, or that frequency of beats per minute almost doubles. So, again, kind of breaking down a little bit more about what we do with VHF in each of the different programs. As I mentioned with California condors, we do that population monitoring. So we're going up and we're basically trying to track the condors daily. We have Yagis. This is actually a little bit of an older style. We have brand new Yagis now, but this is, one of our condor biologists that is tracking at Hopper Mountain National Wildlife Refuge, but we also go mobile too. California condors have 10,000 square mile habitat range. And so, tracking these guys is, takes a little bit of effort, but that's why VHF is so helpful because, just trying to visually track these guys down, it would be impossible. But with clear line of sight, without those physical obstructions, the VHF can travel, about 25 miles is what our Yagis can pick up, at least the ones that we use handheld on the ground. So we try to track the whole population every day. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes we only get a handful, sometimes we get skunked, but that's how we're able to track them. California condors are social. And sometimes, as I mentioned, the VHF transmitters will fall off because their tail feathers molt. And so, we call those condors stealth condors. So the nice thing about condors is they are social individuals. So by being able to track certain ones to a certain location, it allows us to potentially get visuals on condors that may not have VHF that we haven't picked up. And so we're able to verify that they, yes, indeed, are still alive. The VHF condors may be able to lead us to a group where we can watch the behavioral and social dynamics, especially in a season like we're in now, which is nesting season, and seeing those paired behaviors is really important for understanding those dynamics. As I kind of alluded to before, tracking condors allows us to also, or tracking condors with VHF allows us to find nests. So we have, a strategy for being able to find nests. Now, condors, at least in Southern California and Arizona, they like to nest in cliffside cavities. And I tell you what, when you're looking in 10,000 square miles, with condors being able to fly up to 100, 150 miles a day, and you're looking around and you're trying to say like, well, wow, there are a million cavities and I have to figure out what condor is hiding in which one. It can be a pretty daunting task. But fortunately, as I mentioned before, we do have GPS on our condors, and the GPS, needs to connect with a radio satellite or with a satellite in the air in order to, create a location. kind of like if you're trying to use your cell phone in an elevator and you drop service. That's basically what happens with a condor's GPS when it goes into a cavity. And so what we actually are doing is we're looking for an absence of GPS. When we notice that a condor for 3 to 5 days in a row doesn't have any regular GPS hits, that's an indication to us that they might be nesting. And so what we'll do is we'll track those GPS hits to an area where it looks like they've been spending a lot of times, especially before and after those lack of GPS hits, and we'll sit down and look from there. Even still, you'll get to an area where the GPS hits are, and you'll look around and you will still see maybe not 1 million cavities, but more like 10,000 or maybe more like 50. And so it's actually still pretty difficult to say, find the condor in the tiny cavity across the way. So that's where VHF actually really comes in handy. So what we'll do is, we'll try to locate with our Yagi, and we'll dial down our gain as much as we can to try to kind of pinpoint and narrow down the cliff face that the condor is nesting in. But then what we'll do is we'll sit, we'll turn the radio on, we'll point the antenna in the direction, and then we'll just sit and wait. And we'll listen out. And if we hear any change in the strength or direction of the radio frequency beeping back at us, then we know we can get into our scope, because we know that the condor is moving and is likely going to take a break from taking care of its egg or chick. And so VHF has actually been really important. Has been a really important tool for us when we do monitor these nests. And I will say that nest monitoring is really important in the Southern California flock, because when they were initially reintroduced, they did have lower nesting success than the other reintroduced populations in Arizona and Central California. A big part of that was trash on the ground. Unfortunately, condor parents were bringing back little bits of what we call micro trash, very likely thinking that it was probably a calcium supplement like bone or shell to give their chick as it was growing. But unfortunately, being so close to big urban areas like Los Angeles, they were mistaking that shell and bone, that piece of trash for shell and bone, and it was causing impactions in the chick. Fortunately, we're seeing fewer and fewer of those impactions as the population is growing, and as unfortunately some of those older, what we call trashy pairs, have died. So that fortunately is a behavior that we're not seeing as much, but it is still important for us to keep track of those nests. We also use VHF to track fledglings. Now, we do put VHF on condor fledglings in a slightly different way. So when we go into condor nests to put on their very first tag, we have to do it before they're able to fly, because going on a cliffside and trying to track down and catch a bird when it can fly is just not going to happen. Very dangerous for everybody involved. And so we actually go in when the chick is about 4 months old. They typically take their first flight or fledge when they're about 6 months old. But 4 months, their wings are large enough that they can, hold a tag, and, they're not going to grow so much more that the tag is going to kind of tear along their wing line. But unfortunately, their tail feathers aren't grown in enough to be able to attach a VHF unit to their tails. And so we actually hand make their tag, and we have a special kind of chick VHF. And you can see above that number 42, there's kind of a black circle. Just above that black circle, we have a VHF unit that, instead of a straight antenna coming off the back, it's bent at a 45-degree angle. And we actually just sew it straight in there, just using a needle and thread. So very highly scientific. We cut that out of leather, and we just paint on the number 40, the number that it needs to be. And so that's, a slight modification that we use for condor chicks. As I mentioned, we also use VHF to recover ill and injured condors, as well as deceased condors, if we hear that, what we call a mort signal or mortality signal. Fortunately, though, sometimes we get a pleasant surprise in that it is truly just a dropped feather. And so those are always the happy mortality hunting sites, hunting expeditions where we're tracking those VHF units, which it sounds like it's very much like fox hunting for you guys, but we're doing it over condor terrain, condor country, which sometimes leads you through poison oak and other crazy territories. But even if we had a long day of tracking, we're always very happy to see a dropped transmitter as opposed to a dead condor. On the fox side of the program, we do a similar thing. We do population monitoring during the trapping season, which runs from about June to September. We're tracking weekly on the ground. And then throughout the year, they do monthly telemetry flights, which I'll talk about in a minute, to track the foxes across all the islands. So this is just the ground telemetry. We actually use a similar setup, the Telonic setup. And then we also, help to document movement across each island. And as I mentioned before, it's also used for recovering deceased foxes. Now, the fox program is a little bit different because they only collar foxes for a short period of time. And they only collar foxes that they don't vaccinate. So in Catalina Island, there was a raccoon, the famous raccoon, that unfortunately brought the canine distemper virus onto the island. And within 2 to 3 years, 95%, or actually more than 95% of the eastern population was just wiped out because of this novel virus that came onto the mainland. And so it's been really paramount to create a vaccination program across all islands. But they do also understand that we won't be able to vaccinate foxes in perpetuity. So what they want is they actually want, kind of a group of just in case foxes. So we're going to vaccinate like so many foxes. So we just have like a just in case group. The novel disease comes, not everybody will be wiped out. But they do want natural immunity to evolve as the fox population, continues on, because there's a natural evolutionary and adaptive process that's really important that we keep our hands off, because honestly, in the end, nature knows best. But the idea is that when we're selecting foxes to put VHF collars on, we're putting those on the foxes that are not vaccinated, so that if they do die because of a novel disease going through, we can catch that novel disease. And it's more likely to happen in a animal that's not vaccinated. And so they act as what are called disease sentinels. They are only issued a collar for a certain period of time. And so, once we recover, once we retrap them, once their collar is kind of worn off, that's taken off, they don't ever have to wear a collar again. So that's kind of the fox story. And if you don't know the story of our northern island foxes, I definitely encourage you to check that out. That's actually a talk that I could give in and of itself, but it's a very, very cool program. And just because I didn't want to end with dead foxes, I thought I'd give you a photo of a couple of cute foxes, just because, again, cute foxes are cuter. All right. Now, Daphne contacted me for this talk because of something that she had seen. And so I did want to mention, radios can actually give a certain measure of hope. So back in 2017, many of you may remember, hopefully, well, I don't know, hopefully you probably do. It's probably burned in your memory, literally, the Thomas fire that came through. That was just a devastation in Southern California, devastating for so many individuals, especially in Oxnard and Ventura, that lost their homes. So many people that were devastated after the Montecito landslides, just taking out the 101. It was just these series of natural disasters that just shook, kind of everybody's world. And unfortunately, we actually had a condor nest that we had been tracking. And, being near the Fillmore area, we were on the right side of the winds. So we were upwind of the fire. The fire was just slowly encroaching, towards us, towards the Condor Refuge. And we had a nest near the kind of Sespe River that was on the west side of the bank. And we had just been watching the fire just come and come and come. And we knew that there was an active nest there, that there was a chick there. And, there was no way that we were going to risk any person going in to try to do anything with the chick. The chick was, old enough. It had already been given a VHF tag. It was already flying. Like, there was nothing that we could actually do anyway, except for just kind of cross our fingers. The female had a GPS. And so the mom, I guess the mom had a GPS. And so we were able to kind of track her movements, and she kept trying to go back to the nest. But once the fire came through, we actually kind of lost her GPS a little bit. We weren't really sure what was going on. We thought maybe the chick was alive, but when we looked at where the burn scar was, it definitely went over that nest. And so when it was deemed safe enough, I live in Fillmore, and so I offered to, I'll go up, I'll take some telemetry readings, see if I can pick up the chick. And lo and behold, I went up, after the Thomas fire is out, and I heard those beeps. And this was the picture that I took, when I heard those, because it was incredible. The fire burned over the nest, and we thought that there was no way that the chick was going to survive, but there was beeps, and there were not mortality beeps. And so it was very exciting. So a couple of days later, we actually sent a crew out, as part of that crew, to see if we could get eyes on the chick. We didn't know if it was hurt or anything. And fortunately, we actually saw it. It had jumped over to the other side of the canyon. We think that the mom just encouraged the chick to go over. The Susby created a barrier, that water barrier that, didn't get, allow the fire to go to the other side, but the chick ended up surviving. And it was that really kind of ray of hope that we needed after such a devastating fire. We did go back into that nest area the following year, and everything was just burnt. We had camera equipment set up that was just completely melted. So, the mom and the chick, really did what they needed to do. And I tell you what, those first two beeps were something pretty special. Now, I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we don't just use ground telemetry for tracking our population. Lighthawk is this really amazing organization. They're a dedicated group of volunteer pilots that want to contribute to different conservation organizations. And so what we've done with Lighthawk is we've actually attached Yagis to the struts of the airplane, and then they connect to our radio, and we're able to fly over not only the condor habitat, but also over the islands. And we're able to kind of scan through all our different frequencies. And if we have anybody of concern, we're able to pick those guys up, and we're able to track those condors in a really more effective way, because we can get to areas where we can't get. That photo on the left-hand side is the Santa Barbara backcountry. That was after severe rains. We had suspected that there was nesting there, but there was just no access to that area. So we were able to fly a plane out there. We were able to actually track the individuals that we thought were nesting to an area that we were pretty sure that was their nesting habitat. So that was really good for us. It's also allowed us to track mortalities. We're able to kind of fly in a figure-8 pattern and turn on and off the left and right strut and go back and forth between the left and the right strut. And we're able to actually get a pretty good pinpoint of condors that might be deceased or a dropped transmitter. So Lighthawk has been a great way to utilize VHF technology up and off the ground. We're also moving into the drone world. So we do have a drone, and we have a drone that allows us to switch payloads. And so right now we have a camera payload. We're trying to kind of leverage our work with the drone into a VHF payload, but what it'll basically be able to do is it'll be able to track up to 50 different VHF frequencies at once. We can pre-program flights. There's software that's integrated that can actually locate the source of the VHF frequency and basically give us a map of all the frequencies that we're looking for. And finally, we're looking at, or we have actually integrated, excuse me, a MODIS station on our zoo grounds. And basically, this is just antennas. We have 9-element and 6-element antennas looking at the 166 and 434 frequencies, and they're just always on tracking. And so the MODIS system is basically trying to create an internet of wildlife. So anybody that any individual that has a MODIS tag, which is a VHF tag with a digitally encoded frequency in it, if they're, and this is really hitting towards those migratory animals. If they go by, the MODIS station is just constantly looking, constantly looking, constantly looking. And if the individual flies by, it can pick that up. And it basically goes to this big global network, and you can track, populations. So researchers that are looking at migratory species that fly from Canada all the way down to, South America and back don't have to travel the length of that migration route to understand what their animals are doing. And so that's been really cool to be able to be a part of that process. We're in there through our connection with North American songbirds. We're in a Saving Animals from Extinction program through the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and then also through our monarch work, which I thought was really cool. I just wanted to also show you that there's VHF units that can fit on a monarch. So that's a little VHF unit that's been put on the abdomen of a monarch. The technology, I tell you what, is just, it's crazy. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and thanks for letting me talk about wildlife. Like I said, I could probably talk all night, but I won't. I'll let you guys have your night.
Thank you so much, Nadia.
For questions. Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Tom?
Is UHF used as well as VHF? And I'm just curious if it is, is it used for a different type of data tracking, or are VHF frequencies just better suited for this type of operation? Just curious.
I'm actually so glad that you asked that question, because I meant to address that in my PowerPoint, and I just realized that I never did. No, UHF is actually the next wave of technology. So they're actually starting to move into UHF tracking, and all that is it can work just like VHF can. In fact, we've actually wildlife has basically overutilized the frequencies available in the VHF spectrum. And so, UHF is definitely absolutely being used in the wildlife world. There's a technology, CTT, cellular tracking technologies, that has actually kind of moved a lot into the UHF realm. And really that's kind of their next wave. So yes, absolutely, UHF is going to be used. It hasn't been as frequently used, but it's definitely being utilized more and more.
Excellent, thank you. I noticed one note in the chat. Did anyone ask a question in the chat? See if that's a question. In the meantime, yes, Phil.
Are there any island foxes on Anacapa?
No, Anacapa and Santa Barbara are the only islands without foxes. So of the 8 channel islands, only 6 have foxes. Each island has its own distinct subspecies. But the 2 that don't have them are Anacapa and Santa Barbara. And it's probably a good thing Anacapa doesn't, because otherwise the shorebirds would have nowhere to go.
And more back there?
Some kind of vital sign tracking that's being done, or is it mostly just positional?
So there is vital sign technology. I know that that's more utilized. I believe that's more utilized with like diving birds that will actually kind of track those heart rate. I mean, I guess you can use it on most animals. We don't use it in any of the programs that we're involved with. So VHF really is just positional. GPS, if it has built-in accelerometry technology within it, can get fine scale movements. And so we've been able to help out with some accelerometry studies. And basically what you have to do is you need to get videos on an animal in kind of a captive setting, which is where zoos kind of come in with that. And you basically, utilizing the video data, you can see what an animal is doing. And so you can classify certain behaviors like feeding, resting, sitting, copulating, all these different things. And then the accelerometry that's built into the GPS unit we'll get, we'll show a certain data set. And then when you compare that with video data, you can actually say like, oh, okay, this accelerometry data means this behavior. And you can actually parse out different behaviors. So with GPS that has accelerometry integrated, you can get fine scale behaviors potentially. But when it comes to kind of that vital sign tracking, like heart rate or, different potentially hormonal, checks, that's something that we don't work with as much. With our animals that are in kind of our captive setting, our kind of collection animals, we'll do actual sample collection. So, fecal collection, urine collection, blood, if the animal is kind of trained for that, husbandry, to get at those metrics. But that's not something that we utilize. It is out there, but it's not utilized heavily to my knowledge.
Thank you. And Rob?
Are the transmitters encoded in some way so you can identify an individual?
Yes, and I'll go back to this right here. So if you can see kind of written on the VHF unit right there, it does have a unique ID. That's that top number, that top six-digit number. But then it does have a unique frequency. And so the frequency is what we're actually really looking for when we're doing our radio telemetry tracking. We have applied for a certain number of frequencies within the 164 to 166 frequency range. And what we do is, because there's natural fluctuations in frequencies as, temperatures change, as units get a little bit older, we know that when it's really cold, you have to dial down. When it's really hot, you have to dial up. And so we know that that's what happens. And so what we try to do is to make sure we don't have overlapping frequencies, is we try to, get it a few units apart, a few frequency waves apart. So we try to keep it more than 0.03 parts away from each other. What we'll also do is we'll also try to double up on our VHF. And so we'll at least try to put 2 VHF units on a bird. And so sometimes if we hear kind of a double beep, if we know that there's an overlapping frequency with another bird, but we know that one bird has 2 and one bird has 1, we'll be able to identify the individual that way. With the MODIS station, specifically to MODIS and the MODIS network, they have digital encoding within, as layer to that VHF frequency. And so kind of show you that box. So that box that's on there that you can see kind of partway down the tower, that can actually read that digital encryption on top of that, below that VHF frequency. So if multiple programs, have overlapping VHF frequency for whatever reason, there's a unique digital encoding that can identify that individual. So, but that's unique to the MODIS system. The just VHF that we use in general just has the VHF frequency. GPS does have their own digital encryption too. So when the GPS pings, we're able to identify those as individuals.
Cool. We got a lot of questions coming in. Yes.
Awesome.
Question, or 2 questions. One of them is, how long do the batteries in these little things last? And the other one is, how do you catch these things?
That's a really good question.
Or throw a net over them, or how do you?
Yeah, well, I can't speak to, tiny VHF. The size of the VHF, as I understand it, really kind of will determine battery life. So the VHF unit on a Condor is about the size of a AA battery, and that has a life span of about 18 to 24 months. We usually I think see them more lasting along the 24-month side of things, so like 2 years. With foxes, I want to say the collars can last about 2 years as well, maybe 2 to 3, but you can have a beefier battery on that collar because the animal doesn't need to fly. Although condors are actually like 4 times the size of island foxes. But you can navigate things a little bit differently between mammals and birds. So that's kind of that battery life. The GPS units are actually solar powered. So they constantly get charged from the sun. So that's actually pretty cool. In terms of how we trap them, With foxes, we'll put out kind of small mammal traps and we'll kind of tuck them, under bushes. And then we put the ever alluring cat food. We had surf and turf that we used last year. Frisky surf and turf was the, bait du jour. And then we'll put in some wet food too, just to, be super enticing. And then we actually use a hunter's scent lure of loganberry that we'll kind of put around as kind of that scent lure to bring them in. And so that's how we'll trap foxes. For condors, we kind of do something similar. It's not friskies, but it is a nice fresh carcass. And so we actually have a program worked out with a lot of the local dairies near the Bakersfield area where they're stillborn calves. We're able to collect them. And so we'll use stillborn calves that haven't been given any veterinary medications and don't have a risk of lead ammunition or shot in them as like kind of a byproduct. So we'll take those guys, we'll wash them off, and then we'll put them out. And how we trap is using a double door trap system. And so we have a flight pen and then a trap that's right next to the flight pen, and there's a door that goes in between. And then there's also a door to the outside. So what we'll do is we'll put bait outside, we'll put bait inside. We also will throw out some rabbits sometimes too, as deceased rabbits, unfortunately, to try to entice them in. And once they come in, once they go in the trap, we close the door to the outside behind them. We'll open up that door to the flight pen, and then theoretically, if all goes well, they walk in. The nice thing about condors is, as I said, they are very social. So once one bird goes down, usually we'll have a bunch of birds following.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, on the slide that's on the screen, the Modus slide.
Mhm.
There's a comment on in the script, there is this organizations and citizens to undertake impactful research. That implies that a general citizen, one of us, could volunteer to assist. Is there such a program, and how do you get involved with it?
Yeah, well, so the great thing about the Modus network is, there needs to be two sides. VHF telemetry is a two-sided coin. So you have to have researchers that are trapping these animals and putting these Modus life tags on the animal. But then you also need towers in order to be able to receive those signals, because it's one thing to have signals out in the landscape, but if you don't have anything that's receiving them, then there's no way that data can be utilized. And so anybody can invest in a Modus tower. It's about $4,000. So if you have $4,000 you want to invest, then you can build a Modus tower, and you can help contribute to that body of science. The data is also freely available on the Modus website. So if you are interested in kind of looking and tracking individuals and seeing what individuals are out there, that data is available. And if you wanted to get in touch with the researcher, if there is something that you see, if there's a project that you're particularly interested in, the contact information is on there. So that's why, this really is the internet of wildlife that can be open and available to everybody. The idea is that hopefully it goes global, and they can use these life tags, and all animals can kind of use that collaborative conservation model to be able to just kind of help each other out.
Great, thank you. All right, one more question. All right, Norton.
Do you track the mountain lions around here?
That is not a project that the zoo has been a part of, but we do know researchers that are tracking the mountain lions. So the mountain lions actually utilize collars very similarly to the island foxes. They're just bigger because mountain lions are bigger. And so, so we don't work directly with the mountain lions, but the way that they're tracked with VHF and GPS is very similar to how we track the island foxes.
Alrighty, excellent. Thank you, Nadya. So happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Been like I said, this is a first for me, and you guys have been great. Sorry I couldn't make it down there to the sheriff's station. You seem like a really nice group, but thanks for inviting me into your space.
Great, thank you. Wonderful.